Me and Danny are going through some of the hardest clicks to make on Underdog Fantasy right now. If you guys are getting prepped for your home league drafts, this should give you guys a good insight to the current, ADP landscape and some of the guys that we're not really selecting in drafts right now. A lot of these guys are not necessarily guys that we hate. We just don't really like the price at this point. So we'll kind of break down 5 guys each and go through why we're fading them currently in the drafts that we're doing. Of course, take this advice into Underdog Fantasy drafts, get into some Best Ball Mania 5 drafts right now, 1.5 million to first, 15 million in total prizes, and make sure to use the promo code FSE when you sign up and do some of these drafts. So, Danny, without further ado, let's hit the intro. All right, so let's get this thing going here. We're going to start with a guy that everybody feels like they're fading. Everybody feels like they hate. Kyren Williams, running back of the Los Angeles Rams. Right now, going off the board is like an early third rounder. At points, he was kind of in the mid-second round, even a little bit earlier in the offseason. I have him ranked kind of towards the end of the third round, in the mid-third round area. Like I said, he's everybody's favorite fade right now. I don't really want to discount a running back who had like literally a legendary season or a very good season last year. 21 points per game, RB2 in points per game. He averaged over 5 yards per carry, so it wasn't just volume that he got there on. However, I mean, he's already banged up. He's a sub 200-pound running back, and we've really never seen those guys repeat as multi-time RB1s. Usually they have blip on the radar type of seasons, and then they don't usually come back and have these monster volume seasons yet again. If they get there again, it's more of the Devon Achane efficiency kind of running backs. The team also drafts Blake Corum, a guy that has kind of that Devin Singletary quality of coaching staffs just love him. They love that he does his job and he kind of doesn't do anything flashy. He kind of just gets the job done. So when I look at Kyren Williams, his league leading 83.9% snap share, kind of expected to regress a little bit. I still don't mind him. I think he's still a fine click in the mid third round. And that's kind of sometimes where he slides to at this point in time. But in home leagues, maybe people had him last year and they're willing to take him in the late second round area. To me, it's just a little bit too rich for my blood. I think there's a lot of threats to his workload, and that's kind of how he got there last year, which is what makes me nervous about Kyren Williams.
Yeah, I think you outlined it pretty well. Again, this is not to discriminate nor, denounce exactly what he was able to do last year. Like you said, very productive running back, but that did come on the back of an elite workload. We were talking about one of the biggest workhorses in the NFL. This is more so us giving our flowers to Blake Corum than it is hating on Kyren Williams. Again, I think Kyren Williams is a good back. I'm sure you think Kyren Williams is a good back, but when you have a running back like Blake Corum, who has the pedigree that he does, again, 27 or 28 rushing touchdowns in his final collegiate year, national champion, goes in day 2 of the NFL draft to a team that historically has not had loyalty to their starting running back in the past. Again, I'm not to say that Blake Corum is going to take over the job from Kyren Williams. It's more so to say that, like you said, 83.9% snap share, 78.4% opportunity share for Kyren last year. With a back in his backfield like Blake Corum, that can more so look towards the 60 to 65% range in snaps, maybe the 55 to 60% range in opportunities. And if he's not getting that workhorse level opportunity share, does he have the same viability in fantasy like he had last year? Again, I think the market expects that he will take a downtick. Again, he is the RB8 in terms of overall ADP. He was the RB2 in fantasy points per game last year. But I do feel like because you have a guy like Blake Corum there who can threaten goal line opportunities, who has shown the ability to work out in space, that I don't know. Maybe RB8 is even a little too expensive for my taste, to be honest, because there's guys, like you said, Pacheco, Etienne, HN, Henry, Jacobs, that I would just rather straight up prefer in terms of their projection.
Yeah, it's difficult to just draft last year's production and think it's going to be a good strategy. It's like if you had Kyren last year, if you picked him up, if you add him in waivers or whatever, just take the fact that he ran, like he caught lightning in a bottle and he was just unreal last year. I just don't think that's going to happen again. There's too many things going against him. He only played 12 games last year, right? He had a huge workload and he couldn't hold up to it. So they drafted a running back to help supplement that production. Listen to what the team is telling you. That's exactly what they told you with that Blake Corum addition. So who's another guy that you're not really drafting right now, not clicking the button on unless they're falling?
Yeah, and this one breaks my heart because I do think he's a very talented player, and I do think naturally year 3 wide receiver, these are the types of bets I want to make, but I think the market is raising Chris Olave too much for my own flavor. He's a guy going off the board in the top 17 of drafts right now on Underdog, the 205 overall over the likes of guys like Saquon Barkley, Brandon Ayuk. We'll get into some more specific names in a second. As the wide receiver 11 in terms of ADP, I currently have him more so as a 2-3 turn guy, 27th overall, wide receiver 17. And again, I like the player, man. It hurts me that I have to put him on this list. And I understood it last year. If you were to bake in the projection, maybe Derek Carr's this huge upgrade. This offense will throw the ball more. But unfortunately, we saw last year that Derek Carr is what he is. And I would say by Derek Carr standards, he had a fine year, 3,900 yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. But the problem that I have here is that the offensive pace isn't great. The offensive situation isn't great as a whole. Like, this is probably going to be the 15th to 20th best offense in the league. And that Chris Olave was the wide receiver 19 in PPR points per game down the stretch last year. Again, I think he's got the potential quality to be an elite player and finish as a back-end wide receiver 1, but we're currently pricing him in at a point where I probably think his ceiling is at. I think he's almost locked in to be the wide receiver 11 to wide receiver 18 about what he was last year. Again, yes, he's a safe bet to finish as a top 18 wide receiver, but when you're taking him close to the higher end of that projection than the lower end, that's where I'm going to view it as a miscalculation in price. Again, guys I would rather straight up over him: Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor. Again, we could talk about, guys like Cooper Kupp, for example. I have Cooper Kupp ranked higher than Chris Olave, and Cooper Kupp can currently be had nearly 15 picks later. So it just kind of goes to show me that, again, unless he has an outlier touchdown year where he's had 9 touchdowns in his first 2 years in the NFL, and Derek Carr isn't this type of quarterback that can support 30, 35 plus passing touchdowns, I just have a hard way of envisioning him getting past the wide receiver 11 ADP where he's going. Again, if that's where I view his ceiling and he's priced at it, why would I take him there?
Yeah, me and you disagree on Olave a little bit. I don't disagree that 16th overall is overvalued. I actually have him at 21. So I'm actually kind of halfway between where you have him and where the market has him. So again, I think he's slightly overvalued, but I think the way that he would get there is if he takes a major step as a player, which third-year receivers often do, especially when they've been basically wide receiver 2s through the first 2 years of their career. I think that Chris Olave could take a major step this year, a 30% target share. Like you said, he only had 5 touchdowns last year, 4 touchdowns the year before. If he's that dude, and we've seen Derek Carr feed that dude in his offense, whether it was Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, whoever else, especially in the red zone as well, I wouldn't be shocked if we get a 1,300-yard, 8-touchdown season out of Chris Olave, despite me not really believing in Derek Carr. I don't really believe the Saints offense is going to be good. It's just that I have a third-year wide receiver who is by far and away the best receiver in his offense, by far and away the number 1 target in his offense. And I think if he gets better, then he has a chance to really pay off his ADP. Do I think he's going to crush it? Do I think he's going to be wide receiver 4 in points per game? Probably not. But I think when the range of outcomes is like wide receiver 15 to wide receiver 7 or 8, I'm okay taking that at the back end of the second round. Like I said, mid-second round, a little bit too high because I think JT and Saquon and some of the other guys going there have higher ceilings. But like I said, I'm a little higher on Olave than you are. I don't think he's a complete fade, not a guy that I'm not drafting. I'm in the late second round area, which is where I think he'll go in home leagues. I think he's just going a little bit higher on Underdog because of the wide receiver thirst.
No, I think that's fair. The wide receiver position as a whole is pushed up, but I also have a gripe where he's going at wide receiver. Again, I have him ranked wide receiver 17. What it boils back to, again, we argued off camera, Devontae Adams versus Chris Olave. Sure, pick one out of a hat. I really do think that's a 50-50 situation. Again, I would prefer Devontae Adams. You would prefer Chris Olave, but they're close. I would pretty comfortably rather have Cooper Kupp based off what we can expect for him when he's fully healthy. Even last year on a per game basis, when he was healthy in the 11 games he played, was basically a 9 target per game commander with a much better quarterback and a much better offensive situation there with Sean McVay. And then you get into your boy Mike Evans, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, Drake London. It's just tough for me to get Olave up to 11. Again, I think 10 through 18 is a pretty fluid tier for the most part, but I view Olave more so on the lower end of that than the higher end.
Yeah, and I view him kind of in the middle of that. I have him at 14, so I don't disagree with you that Mike Evans should be higher. I don't disagree with you that Drake London, Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk should be higher. I have all those guys rated higher than him, but I would prefer him to Cooper Kupp and Jalen Waddle, who are great number 2 receivers, but the fact that they're not the number 1s of their offense kind of hurt them a little bit. Sure. And then also Devontae Adams, when you're comparing just 2 absolute stud alphas on their team, Adams has more target competition. It's a little bit worse quarterback play, and Adams is an older player who showed a little bit of dissension last year, and Olave is a younger player who is still ascending. So that's kind of the difference for me. But again, I don't think that Olave is super overvalued. I think he's slightly overvalued would be kind of the disagreement we have.
And it's funny because this is almost the inverse of last year, where I thought he was slightly overvalued and you thought he was like way overvalued last year when we made this video. So it's kind of funny how Chris Olave is just a constant of our to let your BUFFOON Leaguemates draft videos.
Yeah, no disagreement there. I think that's probably a good way of describing it. We can move on to the next guy, though, which is, again, spoiler alert at the wide receiver position. We really did try and go a little bit light on the wide receivers in this video because in terms of underdog ADP, wide receivers are just generally pushed up the board because it's a 3 wide receiver start format. Everybody who's drafting on there is very sharp. Structurally, it makes sense to get your wide receivers early and all that kind of stuff. But DJ Moore is a guy that I think is going to be overvalued probably in both formats, both on underdog and in home leagues. Right now, he's going off the board 29th overall, wide receiver 20. I have him at 37th overall, wide receiver 23. And I could probably group Keenan Allen in with DJ Moore as well because I'm just simply lower on both players. And it's not because of Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams is probably going to come in and have anywhere between Joe Burrow's rookie season to CJ Stroud's rookie season. Like, I think he's going to come in right away and produce at a high level and probably support these guys, all 3 of them, 2 pretty solid seasons. The problem I have is that I think Rome Odunze is just that good. I think Rome Odunze could come in and be the best receiver in this offense from day one. Now, that is challenging when you talk about a rookie wide receiver with 2 proven target contenders, DJ Moore, but Rome Odunze compared very favorably to guys like Drake London and Devontae Smith. Wide receiver 1 upside prospects, which is what I broke down in the wide receivers to target and avoid video. We're talking about like a 60% chance that these guys peak as top 5 dynasty wide receivers. So with Rome Odunze, I think he's just going to come in and eat into the target share of DJ Moore, of Keenan Allen. And when you look at just like structurally, why doesn't make sense that DJ Moore is going at 29th overall in the big board before Keenan Allen was traded for and before Rome Odunze was drafted. DJ Moore was being drafted at 24. He's being drafted at 29 now, despite 2 of those guys being added to the offense. And we already pretty much knew that Caleb Williams was going to be his quarterback at that point in time. So for me, I look at DJ Moore and I just think he's about a round overvalued. I think he should be going at that 3-4 turn as opposed to like the 2-3 turn where he's going. Again, maybe in home leagues, that's where he goes. But for me, he's just a smidge overvalued.
See, you mentioned you slightly disagreed with DJ Moore or with Chris Olave. I actually slightly disagree with DJ Moore. Again, I would completely agree that the overall wide receiver trio of Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, like they are arguably the best trio in the NFL. Like they will eat into each other right away. I'm not going to deny that. But I also come back to the fact that DJ Moore had a 27% target share last year. Again, that should go down a little bit, but I still view him as the clear one in this offense. Keenan Allen, older wide receiver, has missed time these last couple of years. And as good as I think Rome Odunze is, especially from a dynasty lens, I think DJ Moore is the clear-cut wide receiver 1 on this team, at least for this upcoming season. Again, 27% target share with Justin Fields last year, 136 total targets, despite having a relatively lower passing volume than we can expect with Caleb Williams coming in. Caleb Williams comes in, obviously increases the overall ceiling in terms of this offense, in terms of passing volume, in terms of overall passing touchdowns. And with DJ Moore, he's shown the ability to flat out win weeks. I mean, just last year alone, he had weeks of, 28 PPR points, 49 PPR points, over 30 PPR points. Like he's the type of player that isn't just going to earn targets and barely make a wide receiver 1 weekly finish. Like if he gets a 12, 13 target game, he has the opportunity to win you a game. Again, this is a receiver who had nearly 1,400 yards, 8 touchdowns last year in a low passing volume offense. And if I think he's going to continue that role as the number 1 for Caleb Williams, and you guys know my thoughts on Caleb Williams potentially having, like you said, somewhere between the Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert level rookie seasons, I think there's an opportunity where we could be looking at him in the same vein as a guy like AJ Brown next year.
I personally just disagree that like DJ Moore's standing in the offense is still the number 1. Odunze is the one who's worked with Caleb the most of these 3 receivers. He's the one in rookie minicamp.
Eventually he will be. Eventually, yeah, I think I honestly will be the one.
I just look at these guys and I see DJ Moore going at the 2-3 turn. I see Keenan Allen going kind of in that early 4th round range. And then Odunze is like a 6th round pick. To me, they should just be all a lot closer. And I think all of them are slightly like Moore and Keenan Allen are about a half round round overvalued, and Odunze is about a round undervalued. DJ Moore should be a 3-4 turn pick. Keenan Allen should be kind of like a 5th rounder, and then Odunze should be a 6th rounder, and they should all be a little bit closer. Again, this is mainly me being higher on Odunze than it is on anything else. I think DJ Moore is still a fine receiver. I still think he's going to start the season as the number 1. I've seen Odunze alpha very talented receivers before, though.
The question that I have, though, is that if we're worried about volume, why are we taking Devontae Smith over him?
Over DJ Moore?
Over DJ Moore.
Because Devontae Smith is in a much better offense that I can project really easily right away.
He's the number 2 wide receiver on a lower passing volume offense versus DJ Moore. Again, I think he's still going to be the number 1. Again, Rome Odunze long-term, I agree with you, will end up being the most talented wide receiver on the team. But at least for Rome Odunze's rookie season, I view DJ Moore at the 1. So a number 1 overall wide receiver on an offense that should throw the ball more. And not to mention, I think DJ Moore flat out is maybe not a better overall player because I think Devontae Smith's a very good player, but at least in the same tier of talent with more volume.
Well, I actually think both of them are overvalued. So I don't really disagree with you. I have Devontae Smith and DJ Moore back to back. So I'm not going to argue that DJ Moore and Devontae Smith are some, huge difference or whatever, but they're literally both overvalued among wide receivers, in my opinion. So I think that's kind of where I stand with DJ Moore. It's more just about the projection. I look at it and I'm like, okay, 27% target share. That's not keeping up. You said it might go down a little bit. I think he's going to be down like 22%. With Keenan Allen there, who can command targets over the middle, with Rome Odunze there, who I think is going to come in right away, command targets with the connection he has with the quarterback built up already. Again, I think they're all good receivers that will eat into each other. So the guy who's going the most expensive, especially when it's like a sizable difference, to me is overvalued.
The thing is though, he had 136 targets last year. Even if that went down to 120, 130, keep in mind, that's also balancing the fact that I think they're going to throw the ball more than 513 times like they did with Justin Fields, like they did with Tyson Bagent last year. Even on 125 to 130 Caleb Williams targets, it's pretty easy for me to picture him finishing past the wide receiver 20 he's going at.
Yeah. I guess it's baking in the range of outcomes of the players going around him too. Because if we're going to be optimistic about every player going around DJ Moore, I can make the argument that they all have higher ceilings than him. But again, we can probably pivot off of DJ Moore, a little bit of a divisive guy. I know a lot of people are either in on him or out on him. He's the type of guy that kind of brings that out in you. So who is the next guy that you're talking about?
Same exact case. People are either in or out on this guy, but I've been leaning out for a little while, especially since we've seen him peak in his second year. And this is a guy that is not a young apple at this point. We're talking about DK Metcalf, wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks. He's currently going off the board in the top 30 ADP, 29 overall ADP. As the wide receiver 22, again, wide receiver 22, again, I'll talk about in a second. I don't think wide receiver 22 is outrageous, but the fact that he's going top 30, this is a guy I have ranked as my 46th overall player, wide receiver 29. And like I said, again, once you get to wide receiver 20 to 30, a lot of these guys have relatively similar ranges of outcomes. But for me, the upside of the receivers that are going after him, I just think taking Metcalf as a top 30 guy is just a big mistake at this current point. He's a fine talent on a slightly above average offensive projection, but the wide receiver 1 upside he had in that second year is gone, in my opinion. And while wide receiver 22 is reflective of a guy that probably doesn't have wide receiver 1 upside, I think there's similar bets in this range that potentially do have wide receiver 1 upside. Amari Cooper, Deebo Samuel, George Pickens, Zay Flowers. I mean, you guys heard me bring my flowers over Jaden Reed yesterday. Like, there's a lot of wide receivers in this ring that I think have demonstrably higher upside than DK Metcalf. Not to mention, DK Metcalf is the once dominant target commander. He showed cracks in that last year. Again, from 2022 to 2023, he saw his target share drop from 24.61% in 2022 to 21.6% in 2023 after adding rookie JSN into the mix. Now going into year 2 for JSN, I expect him to take a bigger leap. If you guys check out Reception Perception by Matt Harmon, you'll see that JSN, despite not having the most production in his rookie year, still graded out very well in reception perception. 70th percentile against man, 76th percentile against zone, 60th percentile against press. I think that JSN is going to take another leap into this offense, and I don't think it's out of the range of outcomes that JSN is the leading target on the team. What does that mean for Metcalf? If he doesn't have that same 25% target share projection, and this is still at best, above average offense in the league, he would need 12 plus, 14 plus touchdowns to pay off. And while he's shown that at one point in his career, I don't think it's a certainty that he'll finish with over double-digit touchdowns. So it comes back to the fact that he's probably about, a 70 catch, 1,000, 1,100 yard projection. And if he's not giving you double-digit touchdowns, how's he going to finish as a top 15 guy?
Yeah, we're going to disagree again on
You
this.
like
There's a
DK?
lot of disagreement in
Okay,
this. I
let's
have
go.
Metcalf right where he's going. So
Really,
I think
eh?
that
Okay,
he's
let's hear
about appropriately valued. I guess the counters, I don't think I totally disagree with anything you said because I'm also high on JSN. I think he's a fine upside swing where he's going. I think the key distinction that I have versus you is that I believe more in the schematic change that Ryan Grubb will come into, where DK Metcalf has been historically like a 40% of his team's air yard share guy. And if they're airing the ball out more, which I think they will, that's going to result in a lot more than 24 deep targets, which for a 40% air yard share guy, that's like kind of what Ayuk dominated of the 49ers offense.
Yeah.
24 deep targets was like a top 15 rate in the NFL. So if Geno's airing it out and this offense kind of operates as more of one that's going to look for the big play, I think you could see a lot more spike weeks out of DK Metcalf and they'll be more consistent than they've been. And that's kind of what he looked like in his breakout season as a second-year player. He still wasn't quite the dominant alpha wide receiver that maybe we thought he could become as a player, but he did have more spike weeks than we were seeing. And he's also been the type of guy who scored a lot of touchdowns over his career too. And we haven't really seen that since that 2020 season as well. So for me, I think the touchdowns and the deep plays could connect more. And that's kind of why I'm more in line with the market on DK Metcalf, because the difference between him finishing wide receiver 24 in points per game this year and finishing wide receiver 11 in points per game this year is probably just a couple deep plays connecting.
Potentially, but the problem that I have is that he hasn't been a top 15 wide receiver since 2021. He hasn't been a top 10 wide receiver since 2020. Like, again, I think at wide receiver 22 cost, that's a fair ranking to have him. I just have guys after him with higher overall ceilings. Again, I mentioned some of the young guys. I mentioned a guy like Deebo Samuel, who was literally the wide receiver 2 in fantasy a couple years ago, tied to that Kyle Shanahan
Deebo
offense.
Samuel's going a solid round ahead of him. So that one's not really relevant.
Similar range in terms of my ranking, is kind of what I pointed to.
Yeah, okay. Well, the guys that are going after him in your rankings that like I would prefer, like I would prefer T. Higgins straight up over him, but like that's pretty much the range that it kind of ends. I think Metcalf is relatively
I still think Diggs over him.
The same guy his whole career. I think the difference with why he hasn't scored quite as well as he did as a second-year player is that his offense throws the ball at like the 20th highest rate in the NFL prior to this year, and I think that's going to change.
And they have 2 quality running backs.
They do. Yeah, no, I don't think that they're going to be like a total ground and pound offense like they've kind of been. And I think that Metcalf has a chance. He's been receiving grade wise the same guy for 5 years now. So I think it's just the changes in the scheme and the offense that I believe in more, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. And don't worry, if you're talking about them potentially running the ball less this year, I do have another Seahawk later on in this list. So I'll let you just kick it off with your next player because we talked about Metcalf. We talked about some of these wide receivers. Are you sticking to the wide receiver train or are you veering off to another position?
Yeah, it's funny. We're talking about all these like same exact projections. Terry McLaurin, who we literally referenced earlier in this video, is the next guy. This one to me makes no sense. 51 overall, wide receiver 31. My rank of him is 20 picks after that at 71 overall, wide receiver 41. I'm just like literally confused with his price, to be honest, because you want to talk about Metcalf being the same guy his whole career. Terry McLaurin has been literally the exact same guy his entire career, which is a wide receiver 2-3 type in fantasy. The Commanders literally led the NFL in pass attempts last year. They led the NFL in pass attempts last year, and Terry had the worst point per game season of his entire career. Jaden Daniels comes in. I don't think they're going to lead the NFL in pass attempts this year. He's a mobile quarterback. In my opinion, he's going to need time to develop as a passer and adjust to the pro game. And we've already actually seen this kind of play out before with Cliff Kingsbury and a rookie quarterback when Kyler Murray was a rookie in 2019. And the Cardinals were 18th in pass attempts that year. Now the Commanders will have like a higher paced offense, and that's definitely good for Terry McLaurin and the whole offense as a whole. But I don't know, man. With Terry McLaurin, I just feel precisely who you come in 7th in your fantasy league and not if you want to win your fantasy league. He's basically been the same guy his whole career, wide receiver 20 to wide receiver 35 in points per game, all 5 years of his career so far. You can say that he finally has a quarterback now and Jaden Daniels is the best quarterback he's ever played with. But to be honest, I mean, Sam Howell played well enough that Terry McLaurin should have had a better season than he did last year. And I don't believe that Daniels will come out guns a-blazing. If he does as a passer, that would obviously change things. But to me, I think that Jaden Daniels is going to be good for his own fantasy value because he's going to run, but I don't think he's going to really elevate the play of Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson a whole lot. If they just play better this year, I suppose he could return on this ADP. Again, you're getting him wide receiver 31. If he returns on his ADP, maybe he's a good pick, but he's not going to crush and have a top 15 season, in my opinion.
I feel like that's been the constant of all the wide receivers we talked about today. We're like, oh, we could see we could paint a picture for how they live up to this ADP, but there's just not really scenarios where they're crushing it. So, like I said, with Olave, Metcalf, you mentioned it with DJ Moore. Again, we disagreed on a couple of those guys, but I completely agree with you with Terry McLaurin. Like, this is a guy that a couple years ago, people were thinking, is he on the same level as A.J. Brown in his division? CeeDee Lamb in his division? Is he one of the best receivers in the league? And again, I still think he's a solid, top 15 to 20 talent in the league. But like you said, Jaden Daniels coming in, rookie quarterback, Cliff Kingsbury calling the shots. Are we really all that optimistic that, yes, could he finish wide receiver 31? Sure. But can he finish as the wide receiver 17 in points per game? I don't see that being an upside scenario for him. So why are we taking him in the top 55 picks of drafts right now when there's flat out way better running back projections going after him?
Yeah, and again, in a home league, if you're in a 3 wide receiver start, PPR, and he falls to round 6 or round 7 because it's not a wide receiver thirst happy trap like underdog fantasy is at times, then yeah, I think I can get on board with him as the 3rd or 4th best receiver on your team, a guy that's going to give you a consistent 13 to 15 PPR points per game. But where he's going right now kind of indicates that he should have a much higher ceiling than he does.
I'm actually so glad that you mentioned Terry McLaurin's name because I actually have him even lower than you do. He's my 79th overall player, 44th wide receiver. And let me pose you this question before we move on. What is the demonstrative difference between Terry McLaurin and Diontae Johnson for fantasy this year?
No, there's not a huge difference, to be honest. And I think you can make the argument that the offense projects to be more pass heavy and more fantasy friendly for Diontae Johnson, knowing that Bryce Young's calling card is a passer, not as a runner, like Jaden Daniels. And 2, I mean, Diontae Johnson and Terry McLaurin have basically been the same guy their whole careers. And Diontae Johnson actually has a much higher ceiling, given that we've seen him finish as a top 10 receiver in PPR points per game when his offense went really pass heavy with Big Ben that final year. So for me, Diontae Johnson, I know he gets a lot of shit for, dropping the ball and stuff. And I think McLaurin's a better receiver than him straight up. But for fantasy, PPR scoring and that kind of thing, I think very similar projection.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I can move on to my next player here. And technically speaking, this was my 4th listed player, but because I already alluded to him earlier in the video, Kenneth Walker, running back of the Seattle Seahawks, going off the board as the 66th overall player, RB16 on underdog right now. I currently have him ranked 72 overall, RB18. So not a big significant difference, only 6 picks after where he goes on underdog, 2 running back spots after. But for me, again, once we're projecting for home leagues, he's probably going to get bumped closer to the 50 to 55 range in most of your home leagues. Again, RB16 feels like a fair constant for where his market value is going to be. But this really just comes down to me with Kenneth Walker that he has a lack of overall volume, a lack of consequential volume, talking about goal line opportunity, talking about receiving opportunity. And for me, when I watch Kenneth Walker, he reminds me of the DeAndre Swift style runner where he's got the big plays. He looks good. A lot of people watch his highlights and think he's this great player, but he struggles on a down-to-down consistent basis. I don't think he's got the best vision. And I do think there's a more consistent between the tackles running back on their team respectively, which we'll get into in a second with Zach Charbonnet. Many expected that Kenneth Walker would have taken this massive year 2 step. Again, with Zach Charbonnet, yes, still there, potentially limiting some opportunity, but he basically produced the exact same year in year 2 as he did in year 1. Same type of volume, same type of targets. We didn't really see him evolve as a player, which is my worry for Kenneth Walker. I like him as an RB2 projection, but he's far more volatile than the other bets in this range. Like if I go to my running back rankings right now for the running backs going around him, we're talking about I would rather have Joe Mixon. I'd rather have James Cook. I'd rather have Alvin Kamara. I'd rather have Ramondre Stevenson. And I think Kenneth Walker is more so closer to the DeAndre Swift area than he is to those guys respectively. With Kenneth Walker, again, there's really no real path to him crushing unless Zach Charbonnet were to go hurt. Unless Zach Charbonnet were to get hurt. And I honestly think there's a much more real possibility that Zach Charbonnet can take a further step going into year 2 and command more work out of the backfield. Again, a guy that was already trusted on 3rd downs last year, a guy that showed the ability to command a workload when Kenneth Walker missed time. I just think there's way too many things that need to go right for Kenneth Walker to crush this ADP. Again, fine RB2 level projection, but I think Charbonnet is a good player. I mean, they still have, even though I'm lower on DK Metcalf, 3 capable wide receivers in a beg and grub system. it's tough for me to get Kenneth Walker for over 270 opportunities, which he'll need to pay off.
Yeah, he's hard. He's a hard projection because last year through 7 games, he was a top 7 running back. He actually looked pretty good. And then he started to get banged up and his workload kind of tapered off. And we all kind of know the story with rookie running backs. Behind him was Zach Charbonnet. After a couple games had passed, he starts working into the offense more with the starter banged up. So yeah, I don't really disagree with you on Kenneth Walker. He's my RB17. So it's one spot lower than his ADP. But I also think that's about where he's going to finish too.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to draft a guy who has, you know, like you said, not a lot of receiving upside. It's a new coaching staff too. They didn't draft this guy. I mean, like the GM is still there and that kind of thing, but it's not Pete Carroll. He doesn't really have any loyalty to Kenneth Walker. Who's to say that Zach Charbonnet doesn't carve out even a sizable workload or maybe even take over the backfield altogether? So for me, I look at Kenneth Walker and I'm like, yeah, I think he can have big plays. I think he can have spike weeks, but unless he slides past ADP, he's probably not the type of guy I want to draft.
Yeah, like we're talking about his overall touch volume again in terms of opportunities. In his rookie season, he had 263 opportunities in 15 games versus last year he had 256 opportunities in those 15 games. Again, like you said, he battled injuries in both years, but the difference for me is that I think Zach Charbonnet is a good enough player. And like you said, with the new coaching staff, Zach Charbonnet going into his second year, like there's a real possibility that this is a 50-50 time load and you don't want either of those running backs.
Yeah, I would say I'm not totally against Walker because he does have some great qualities. I mean, he was second in the NFL in juke rate last year. And I mean, if you look again,
breakaway running.
It's difficult to look at Kenneth Walker and paint the picture that he's a great pick in fantasy. But again, if you look through 7 games or 8 games before he started getting banged up last year, he was paying off pretty sizably at his ADP. Is it chicken or the egg? Is it because Kenneth Walker took a step forward, or is it because Zach Charbonnet was a rookie and they didn't want to rush him onto the field? That's kind of where you kind of balance out